welcome guys. We have Julze Serendipity here. Julze is a little bit of an entrepreneur, I guess you could say, from where you've come from to now you're owning it's like a herbal tea kind of like.
You know, it's funny.
Natural.
Yeah. Well,
what is
everyone
the actual?
kind of, it's not tea, but like it's funny because no one says it now usually about Teelixir. Teelixir was actually a name that was come up with by my business partner.
Yeah.
He sort of poached me from my original business that was just sort of like, doing markets and just trundling along. He has an incredible array of talent, so I'm very blessed to have him on board. But Teelixir is just referring to the fact that these herbs like Reishi and chaga and hushawu and cordyceps and whichever ones were originally brewed in teas.
Yeah.
Right, but they're elixirs, so they're elixirs of life.
Yes, cool.
So it's not so much tea, but when I was doing Mind Body Spirit Festivals, I mean, people come and go, "Oh, tea," and I'm like, it's not tea. It's like there's a really bit of powders usually. So,
well, it is like I've had your stuff before and other people's product, and then if you don't get the right mix, it does taste like you're literally drinking dirt, and then you're like sometimes with a different type of like mushroom or whatever it is, and then if you get it right, it tastes amazing, and you're just like, this is so good. And generally, you just follow the directions of the packet rather than like souping it up. And I found myself when just even using your product, it does like just the reishi mushrooms like helps me like no problem just falling asleep, but also just reducing that stress and stuff throughout the day. And then like obviously there's been a few other podcasters in the bigger sphere of podcasting, like Tim Ferriss and stuff like that, who kind of popularized the whole mushroom like elixirs, as in like Four Sigmatic and those other guys who are like doing the more of a commercial kind of situation. And I want to know, how did so from you said your business partner poached you, maybe even he
cut that out.
maybe he discovered you.
There's a story to that. No,
that
actually is a really interesting story to that. My business partner, his name is Daniel Whitechurch. He's actually a keyboardist in like a famous band called Miami Horror.
Yeah, cool.
And I was doing the St Andrews Market, which is this little sort of hippie market out sort of on the way to King Lake. So it's kind of a really weird place to have a market, but they've got this, expanded space and like a hall and stuff like that. And it's been running since like the 1970s. So it's like a very grassroots sort of experience, coupled with like, it's weird, man. Like it's, because I did that for like 3 years solid, and I've been associated with St Andrews. I lived near St Andrews at one point, and whatever seems to be going on in the spiritual realm seems to get kicked up there.
Yeah, right.
So like the really hypersensitive people will come in, and like if it's like some really powerful like Lionsgate or whatever, they'll feel it. Yeah. And this is the collection of that people, so it's like really compresses that down. Now, one of the things that I sold, and I actually do sort of still sell it, right, but in a very different way, is Ormus. I don't know if you're familiar with Ormus. No. Ormus is like an ancient Egyptian technology where you're refining either sea minerals, right, and it's done like on a full moon and stuff like that. And it actually refines them into a substance that's really for divine manifestation. Yeah, okay. And that can be anything from the physical right down to the spiritual elements. And man, does this stuff make strange things happen. So the day that I met Daniel, he walked into my tent. He was actually there with his girlfriend at the time, and he was on tour. So he was like, because he's actually from Eltham, which is not far from St Andrews. Yeah, and I mean, he'd been living in LA and been coping with some health conditions that he was, feeling more and more fatigued, having like, been sort of running the midnight oil and beyond. Yeah, like I can imagine being a rock star. Being like in a rock band and traveling around and all the sort of things that go with it. And so he'd actually been exploring tonic herbalism, and particularly things like reishi mushroom, which you mentioned. I mean, reishi's so incredible. It's got such benefits for mental stability and calming the neurotransmitters of the mind and balancing those things out, and so many things. And he walked into my tent, and I mean, I think he saw not only the mushrooms, which I mean, the labels were terrible, right?
Yeah.
But like me and only a handful of other people had actually brought the medicinal mushrooms into Australia at that point, and we hadn't even accessed the goods. It was actually Dan who finally found the really good stuff. Because for me with Reishi, I was actually more interested in chaga.
Yeah.
But we were actually at that time only able to access grain-grown mushrooms,
which isn't as pure. Like.
Well, it's not that it's just different times where people knew different things, and the process has got more and more and more refined. And the reality is, if you're going to get mushrooms, you don't want mushrooms that are grown on grain, because that's kind of like the growth medium, right, of the mushroom. Like a mushroom naturally grows on wood, and so grain is kind of like feeding mushrooms a junk food diet. And just like if we put bad fuels into our body, we're not going to function as well. And the same thing goes for the mushrooms. But anyway, so he came in and he saw those, and he saw the ormus, and he was like, "What the hell?" Like, I think it threw him that he'd never seen anything like this in Australia before. And I remember the moment that he came in, because sometimes for anyone who's done marketeering before, you really need to have sandbags to like hold your tent down. And I was holding onto it, because I'd often be hanging onto it like this, right? And I was lucky because this massive gust of wind came through and nearly blew my tent away. And I had to really hold it down. And it felt like this really powerful alchemical moment, which I didn't realize was a thing at the time. It was only looking back.
It was
in
like
retrospect.
this energy's just coming into your field, and it's just like, here's this person.
Yeah. And I mean, he just bought a bunch of my stuff and left, but he gave me his email address because I discovered he was in LA. And I was like, "Oh my God, dude, can you take pictures of the recipes or whatever at Air One, which is like this very famous kind of like meeting place." But this guy who I follow a lot, Truth Calkins, he's an amazing guy. He's like a modern day Taoist on the truest level. Too much to talk about now, but he essentially created for himself and everyone else this place where it was like a healing joint, where he follows the Donna Gates zero sugar diet, etc., because he had serious conditions, but he built a tonic bar around that. So he studied tonic herbalism and things like that, and Reishi again was another hugely transformative herb for him. And so I was like, "Dan, dude, you've got to go and find me this recipe." And Dan is very he's like the opposite energy of me. I'm very intense and fiery and whatever, and Dan's very calm and collected and sensible. And so he didn't do that, but a few weeks later, which I wasn't expecting, I suddenly got this email, with I don't know how he got it, but basically all the recipes of it. And the long story short is that I didn't see Dan again for another, I think it was a year, and he turned up to St Andrews again. And then me and another friend of mine, Sharon Bolt, we actually started this juice bar, which still exists actually in the Docklands, called Home. And we had ridiculously high aspirations that we were going to turn it into a tonic bar, and we were going to do this and we were going to do that. But the guy who actually wanted to make it really was just trying to, I don't know if you remember Press Juice, I don't know if they still exist, but all the juice bars that had kind of started to collectively group themselves around Melbourne, an investor who had money and saw that from a monetary perspective, wanted to build that. But we had other ideas, and we kind of created this incredible collection of hippies, one of whom who is a yogi, and he became the manager, and he was actually working in a juice bar, I think in San Francisco. And my good friend Ed, who's now, it's hard to describe Ed, but he's you'd love to talk to him, and he's he's into alchemy, proper tripreme alchemy and all that sort of thing. And Sharon, who runs a thing called shamanic energy training, which is a qigong based, but also plant medicine amalgamated with spirit allies and all sorts of amazing things. And that's been hugely developmental for me. But originally it was me, Sharon and Dan that went to have a look at this place, but Dan couldn't do anything about it, so he went back to LA and that all kind of fizzed out as well.
Yeah.
But long story short is because we got these tonic herbs that I wanted for the bar, which ultimately got shelved. We spent thousands on these herbs.
Right, yeah.
But we built Primal Essence out of that,
Yep.
which was primarily Dan's idea. And that was kind of the Venn diagram crossover into Serendipity Superfoods. So he started designing labels and stuff, and I was still doing markets, and I was still doing Mind, Body, Spirit festivals and all sorts of things. I mean, all the while at the same time, basically on unemployment benefits. I'm like a long-term unemployed type person. Not anymore, obviously, but yeah.
So that was you grinding, making minimal wage, just trying. You knew that there was something there, and you knew you wanted to do something, but it was just like, where's this tipping point? When's it happening? And how long down that time frame was that tipping point that you guys actually like cracked it? And was...
Well, you know, it's funny because in 2011, right, I finally yielded to my friends, and I'm pretty sure my girlfriend at the time also was, you know, kind of going, dude, you've really got to do something with your life, and it was pretty much either do work for the dole or the NEIS program, and I was getting superfoods and things like that because I've been involved in the raw food movement and all sorts of things like that. And I was trying to avoid essentially what was really obvious, in the sense that I'd created a sort of a cooperative, which really was primarily me because a lot of the people in the cooperative were working, and I would go and buy superfoods and we'd get it cheaper. So I'd go and buy it from companies like Loving Earth that were in their much more embryonic phases, and they still let me actually rock up to their doors and stuff like that. You know, and so I actually did a NEIS program around it, which originally was centered around fulvic acid, a product we still carry.
What's the NEIS program?
NEIS is the New Enterprise Incentive Scheme. So it's set up by the government. So if you're unemployed, it gives you all of the tools to basically build a small business.
Oh, that's amazing.
I fell in love with marketing.
Yeah.
I was just like, this is the best ever. This is amazing. So I got obsessed with like branding and things like that. And I'd also, another girlfriend of mine had basically been obsessively trying to build her cupcake like bath bomb business. So I'd seen that obsession with marketing before. But yeah, anyway, and I did that, and slowly but surely I kind of built Serendipity Superfoods. But I was also at the time like very much obsessed with this thing called the template, which was using sacred geometry in ceremony. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Like obsessed with it. Like I went to Bali and I was very closely associated with Carlos. Like before he was made an ambassador and all that sort of thing, I used to hang out in St Kilda, and we went through some strange shamanic processes. Yeah. Like you know, I was a raw foodie at the time, so my nadis and my chakras and all those systems were so open that, you know, and so like I was having loads and loads of cacao, but also loads and loads of these tonic herbs. And when you have things like these tonic herbs in the right conjunction, and you're open enough, right, you can actually really like open up those Shen qualities, that spirit quality, where you feel like an incredible calmness, almost like, I suppose, being stoned, but it's different. Yeah. You know, it's, you know, because you're essentially working through these yin kidney aspects and these heart opening aspects, and, you know, etc. But so I didn't really put a lot of energy into the business aside from on a cursory level, and it was only at the end of 2011, I think, or 12, where I realised the world wasn't going to end, that I actually started to do markets and things like that and really push for it. And it was only from there that I built this momentum. I never really wanted to run a business, just to be clear. I wanted to be left alone. Yeah. Right. And this was my way of doing that, while at the same time delivering what I believed in. You know, at the time I was selling everything from cacao to maca to bee pollen to acai berry, like whatever I was into, chia seeds, goji berries, and I would be constantly on the hunt to seek these things. And originally, the first mushrooms I ever had, I actually took to Bali with me just to help me out. They were like, Paul Stamets was changing his brand over. And then I would buy them off iHerb, this company called Mushrex, and like, basically no one bought the mushrooms. But somehow I suddenly flipped and got obsessed with getting the mushrooms. And it was the same day that I actually went out and found my first shamanic mushroom, which I was cut off from being able to be helped from an outside influence. So it was like I had to have that full interaction with that mushroom and like trust that that's what it was, even though I knew that it was that particular place. But on that same day, through really weird circumstances, before I left, like an hour before I left, I actually found Chaga in Australia, and I was like, oh my God. And so I started like bringing these like cans, I was literally in a can of mushrooms in, and that's what started my love of the mushrooms, even though I had still this incredible periphery of other things. But over time, it just became more and more about the mushrooms, because we didn't realize what was coming for those of us who were sort of into it. Like it picked up more and more energy and focus for people, and definitely companies like Four Sigmatic that made it super easy, because they were a European company at the time. Yeah. And then they jumped ship and went to the States, and then obviously they've built their little empire of like sachets and stuff. Yeah.
Making it
making it accessible.
And I think that's what's kind of taken it from that left of field, like almost what you would consider maybe like kind of a hippie potion kind of situation, and they've now started bringing it through, and there's all that research now starting to back end of it. Like you guys are probably like, yeah, this stuff works. Now the neuroscientists and stuff, and I know like John Hopkins has done a bunch of research and stuff into psychedelics and also medicinal mushrooms and the benefits of them. So I think like, how you were almost that leading edge of the arrow, and everything else is kind of slotting in behind it as time's come by. And I guess like as a consumer, people just and it's like, with marketing, it's like as a consumer, they'll wait until there's like a clarification point or something that actually backs what there is, and then once that starts to there's that history behind it, or the research, people go, oh yeah, they stand up and actually take notice, and then you go, cool, like let's give this a shot. And I think that's where it's at now. Like I even know, like if I do a post about drinking the tea or drinking one of the elixirs or something, about people go, what's that? Like what does that do? They're getting a little bit more inquisitive onto the benefits of these different mushrooms, these different elixirs, these different tonics, which is great, because it's like there is other options other than modern medicine that can help these certain situations. It's all good. So so what I was kind of coming to is, what kind of benefits and stuff can people generally get to see from certain mushrooms, and where would you if you want to go down this route, where would someone enter into that whole tonic based thing?
I have to like defer to honestly the masters, people who've really influenced me, like Ron Teagard and Truth Calkins, actually, and like all the people who kind of followed that, like David Wolf and Daniel Vitalis and stuff like that. But one thing I realised I kind of derailed from before is that because what we had access to, because I mean, what you got to understand is that there was a time when it was almost impossible to get mushrooms into Australia. It's still not easy to get them in. Like it still requires a lot of jumping through hoops and stuff like that, because there are a lot of customs and quarantine rules here.
Because they're not just all made in Australia; they're made.
No, I mean, if I'd known we were on film, I would have actually brought, like, I could have brought an actual reishi to show you, and that reishi that I've got, which is very much just a showpiece, it's irradiated. Now, I originally played with a radiated purple reishi, and I still extracted it into alcohol, and it was still amazing, right? But it's still irradiated, so it's going to have different aspects on your body. Now, when you go to like a Chinese herbalist, the reishi you're going to buy, if you're buying those pieces, they're irradiated. So in order to get them in, they actually have to go through certain levels of process and certain levels of heat in order for them to be, which is fine because they actually need that heat to do that. But anyway, so the reishi that we were getting originally was grown on grain. So while I was getting benefit from the chaga because it was half wild, half cultivated, the reishis and the cordyceps and the lion's manes, they really just tasted like rice bubbles. And like, it's a real buyer beware, and it's really important. We're fortunate in Australia, like there's very little of that here. In America, 9 out of 10 brands are rubbish. They're pointless. And that's why people, I think, go into that doubt of like, oh, this is just a fad. This doesn't mean anything, right? But the truth is that when you have real reishi, and I remember when Dan like got our first like 10 to 1 reishi extract, and it was the real deal, and you took it and you were just like, oh, okay. Like, it really calms you down. And I think that reishi is one of those pivotal mushrooms because so many people are getting into psychoactives now, right? And they're doing this kind of mash between either pseudo or modern spirituality along with these medicines, without realizing that when these medicines were taken originally, they were taken after performing a whole bunch of austerities, like fasting or preparation. And certainly like the people who did these things, they were doing them while accompanying daily practices, whether it's meditation, qigong, yoga, like very intense exercise that strengthens the heart, right? And therefore the expression of the heart in as a meridian. Now, one thing reishi does, right, which I think is really good, is that it opens gateways, right, to the spirit without tearing them open and affecting like the dopamine and all of the neurotransmitters in a dangerous way. Because I think the thing is that when you are not aware or strong enough to be able to cope with a psychoactive experience and you haven't prepared properly, it's like you kind of just come back from it and you're just a mess. Yeah. And you're not really putting the pieces back together. It's not that you're not learning anything, but you're learning anything through the most shambolic and dark and chaotic path. Yeah. Right?
And it also opens you to that other stuff that could be out there could then, because you're now open, it's like what energy you're going to be more susceptible to taking that energy back, that negative energy as well as any positive energy in. So it's like, so
exactly,
Reishi allows that more controlled.
Yeah. And so it's funny because I'm really glad that you brought this up because I really wanted to be prepared for this. So I actually did a little bit of like homework. I just wanted to kind of readdress the specific properties of reishi in terms of its shen, but more importantly its spirit and its like abilities to affect mental health. One important thing to understand about reishi is that reishi is not a drug. It's not a spiritual drug, which like you can very easily kind of misconstrue. You can go, oh well, reishi is, a spirit herb, therefore I take it and I'm enlightened. It doesn't really work like that. It's more like, because you do yoga, right? Yeah. It's more like yoga. Like one thing I found with doing yoga is it made me feel physically great, but emotionally it made me feel like a mess. And this was many years ago, and that was my experience because that was what was needed to happen, is like all these bits sloughing off, And so in nature, reishi is a saprophyte, and what that means is that a tree that's fallen down and is decaying, right, needs to be returned to the earth as like the humus for the soil, and so that it's going to nourish and rebuild that ecosystem. But first of all, it needs to be taken down, and the best way to do that is for a saprophyte like reishi to do that. And so the way it works in terms of your spiritual development or your application is that it allows space for you to deal with mental stresses, for anxiety. And that's not to say that it doesn't have actual physical capacities to do that, but it will do so in a way that's appropriate for you. So there are certain people, and it sounds like you might be one of them, where you take reishi and you go, this is the best thing ever, it's solved all my problems. Right? For me, I've always been like, all these people say it does this, and right? I'm a very highly strung, stress-driven person, and so for me, reishi is going to have a very different application. It's like it's slowly taking away the layers, Sometimes it makes me feel good, but in terms of like, I guess the science, or at least the Taoist science behind it, what Reishi does is it drains the fire from the heart. So let's say you're like really pissed off, right? If you take it, you're not going to be like, right? But it's
fully transcending, but
but it's just going to take the edge off, you know. And that's why I think as an introductory herb, it's brilliant, because it will open gentle doors for people, right? And for some people, it will be profound. For others, it might just be like, well, I feel a little bit less stressed, right? What's brilliant about Reishi is it's got what's called Jing, Qi, and Shen. So these are the three treasures. So the three treasures are Jing, which is your kidney energy, your original core essence, which is the most important energy to cultivate. Then you got your Qi, your everyday fire, which you get from your food and from your daily practices. So that builds you. And then that ultimate expression, which is your Shen, which is your spirit. And it's like it's a herb of spiritual potency, in the sense that it's used in conjunction with daily practice to augment that spiritual expansion and that application. And hence the reason it was at one point, it's been around for like at least 2,000 years in terms of its use in TCM and Taoist practices, but it was once reserved only for, priestly and imperial class, on pain of death. If you were found, collecting Reishi and you weren't collecting it for the emperor, it was a capital offence. So it was known because the emperors and the rulers at that time were considered to be almost like the right hand of God, and not in the way that sort of the Judeo-Christian way of like, which is more like the swinging of the sword. It was more the idea that these herbs were given to the emperor so they would rule justly and with wisdom. Not just based on the fact that they, happen to have a crown, right, in the way that we see in the West, but rather that by having these things, they would guide the people and their entire land much more in harmony with the Tao. So, but I mean, anyway, it's like getting diverted. Like Reishi is just, it's so gentle. It, helps detoxify the liver. It helps like calm the heart. If you're a coffee drinker, you can have it with your coffee, and it will actually have what's called a cardiotonic effect. So it basically reduces the stress on the heart. It balances out neurotransmitters in the brain. So like all of these things that are going haywire due to stresses, it just it balances out, and it's an adaptogen. So wherever that adaptation needs to happen in the body, including the immune system, like, because when you feel really sick and you've got like flus and colds and stuff, you just don't feel on top of your game. You feel,
a bit sluggish.
Well, not just sluggish, but like it's hard to be, like even though I know like when you do something like your daily practice, you're gonna feel better, but like you're gonna much rather do it when you're feeling good rather than when you're not. And so the more that you can balance out your immune system and have that functioning on like its highest efficiency, the more that you're going to be able to stay calm, right, in a stressful situation and just deal with it. It's like the classic, like when you got a little kid and they're a bit sick, they're just so grumpy, right, and like more prone to being like tantrumy, So it's one of those things that it does so many things on so many levels that just continually lead to that one same place, which is just like calm, even, connected.
It's good
energy.
It's a brilliant mushroom, that's for sure. Like that's where I kind of started dabbling in my and trying different things, and anybody who ever asked me about stuff was like, maybe just start with the Reishi and see how you go from there. So bringing it back into like your business and stuff now, so how did you then start to scale up to where you actually are now? Like, was that through still with Dan, or is just this snowball just started to keep rolling, and eventually now this is where you are here? You've got
that's a really good question, because I think when people can't see what's in front of them, right, it's very difficult to take that leap of faith. I was very fortunate in the fact that I had nothing to lose, right, and everything to gain. So for me, the only stresses that were in my life was holding out against job networks that were constantly trying to push me into areas where it was distracting me from where I was focused, because by that point I was committed to building the business. whereas before it was more actually just like the saprophytic nature of Reishi. So I'd say that, you know, that would really much play it out, is that I wasn't ready to be birthed into anything, and over time I was, right? And the amount of luck and serendipity that occurred in terms of, I'm going to say, getting away with like centrelink stuff is insane. You know, everything from them making like key errors to me having been part of the system for so long, I knew how to play the game and just get them off my back. But very much near the end, because I didn't get back to the fact that I actually did the NEIS program a second time. And it was getting to such a boiling point where it was like, look, we know you're working on your business, but we have to do this or this. And I said, look, let me do the NEIS program. And I said, well, look, because you can't do it more than once every 3 years, and it's supposed to be a new business. And me and Dan were working together, and we hadn't actually formed Teelixir yet. I mean, we were already building the labels, and, you know, like Dan was like, because Dan is an incredible graphic designer. This is the other thing. So he designed all of the look of Teelixir, which is fantastic noodles. But basically, it was getting to that point where my luck had run out.
Yeah.
Right. And so I actually called up NEIS and said, look, man, I mean, this is a real. It's basically the same business, but I argued that it wasn't. I said, I just need the 9 months. I know this time. I know with every inch of my being, it's going to launch it. I just need to be left alone for that last little period, and I can launch it. And it was interesting because at the end of that 9 months, when my money had run out and Teelixir was sort of, I mean, we weren't paying ourselves much. Dan was living off, you know, Miami Horror, and I was living off the dole. I was living in a ex-police station, right, which was like where our business was run and where I lived.
Yeah.
So that was interesting and super creepy. I kind of almost like went back to the dole, because it was like that typical MO of where if you're used to something for such a long period of time, it's that safety net. And the amount of hoops that I would have had to jump through to do it, I realised, I won't do that. So there was other levels of serendipity personally that just got me over the line with the money that I needed. And this is the big thing, is that have faith.
Yeah.
If you're at this point where you're like, this doesn't look like it can happen, have faith, because just the right amount of money turned up to get me over the line. I remember there was actually one point where, and it was a big deal then, like, because you only get like $600 a fortnight or something like that on the dole, which, I mean, I remember at the time thinking that was heaps.
Yeah.
And I lost it all. I literally must have pulled it out of the bank and lost it.
Oh, literally just
lost it.
Yeah.
And like at that time it was a really big deal, and I just had to maintain that faith. But the next step which happened, which is that Dan in particular was really pushing it, because I mean, he'd come from a place where he'd actually been working, you know, where I hadn't. So I had a different mentality. Even though I was working on the business, I didn't have that understanding that I think Dan really had. And he kept saying, how can we get to the next level? How can we get to the next level? And that's the thing. You can definitely do actions to move you to that next level, but it's not just the actions, it's also the intention, right? Where you ask yourself the question. Tony Robbins says, ask the question, right? So if you ask a question like, why is my life such a shambolic mess? Well, it's just going to create the answer for you. But if you're like, well, how can I get to the next level? How can I get to the next level? And so Dan kept like pushing that, and I kept saying, I don't know, man. I you know, like, I'm just doing my thing. I kept doing the markets. I just kept pushing. Like, we kept building websites, and Dan did all that sort of thing. And we just kept working and working and working so that we could build it. But we didn't have any answers. Now, I got rung up one day because I got sick and tired of doing Mind, Body, Spirits, and I got called by, I think it was called the Naturally Good Show, right? And I'd already kind of like, yeah, I might do it. Like, you kind of do this, like, not quite agreeing to it thing. Anyway, they rang me up this day and they said, look, we've got this place for you, you know, for this weekend. And I was like, I mean, Dan's going to be in town. And so I had all this work to do too. So I was like, I tried to just fob them off. Because they said, look, you know, what would you be willing to offer us for this place? Because it's like a last minute thing. So I said, oh, look, $1,000. And I didn't really want to spend any more than that anyway. And I thought they were going to say no. They go, oh, we'll get back to you in an hour. And I was like, great. Now I can get back to my work. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
Right. And what ended up happening, they called me back in an hour and said, yeah, that's fine. And I was like, okay, great. Now I've got to organise to do a whole event. And like Dan had literally just landed. And I said, do you want to do this event with me? And he said, yeah, okay, cool. Now, because it was only 1,000, we knew that we at least had the opportunity to break even or even make money. Anyway, long story short, a lot of people approach you at these events, you know, be in my magazine, you know, buy my product, whatever. Anyway, and this guy rocked up with like this scrappy bit of paper that said Thrive Traders, and they said, we love your business, we can help build your business. And because it was such a scrappy bit of paper, like it sort of threw a lot of doubt to us. You know, we did our show, but then we decided to meet up with these guys and, you know, agree to, you know, like get them to help us get to the next level.
Yeah.
And honestly, if we had one distributor in Victoria at the time, which is amazing. A big shout out to Dina, she's great. Happy Greens. So that was really like our bread and butter, was like that distribution and basically me doing markets, right? Which wasn't really enough. Like it was, all the money was just getting poured back in. But this point was like a huge turning point where we agreed to work with these guys. And actually, this is another interesting story. Like I actually called up my friend Brendan, who runs Super Orbs. I don't know if you know that company.
Yeah.
So weirdly enough, when I was leaving, I just moved out of Brunswick, and I moved all of my stuff into storage in a Brunswick storage facility. And so you can imagine how big a storage facility is. Literally, the storage facility that wasn't meant to be my one, because they couldn't give me the one I needed. And so I got a bigger one, which allowed me to store this couch, which was this awesome couch, which I regretted. Well, I didn't regret, but I needed to sell it for money anyway. But it allowed me to store this couch so I could sell it. Right? But not only that, literally the next storage facility was Brendan's office. So I'd come back from a Sunday market and be talking to Brendan about, like, you know, little business ideas and marketing and rah. And he kind of was a little bit more ahead of the game at the time. So that was wild. So I actually called him and said, you know, what do you think about these, you know, Thrive Traders? What do you think of them? And he said, yeah, you know, like we haven't exactly started with them, but we, you know, give them the tick. And so we started with that, and that's what changed everything.
That's so good.
Right? And it doesn't mean that it instantly happened overnight. It definitely built up over time. But that question that Dan had asked, you know, how can we go to this next level? That was the answer.
And it just got presented to you. Like, eventually it's like, how's it going to happen? It's like, you can plan it out, but it's as long as you continually just, like, throughout your story now and listening to it, it's just like your belief system in this idea on this business that you wanted to do from scratch. It was your belief system that carried that through to pretty much now where it is now. Like, you fended off everybody. Like, I know myself with my personal training business and stuff, there's been times where I've like gone, how the hell am I going to pay bills? Like, but I believe in what I want to do and how I want to help people. That is the overarching message, and what the drive, no matter what and how hard or how much you're scrapping for food or scrapping to pay bills or you're fending off the bill collectors, knowing that deep down self-belief that this is what my dharmic path, this is what I'm here to do. And just listening how to watch your story and how you've come through and you've known, okay, like this is going to work, this is going to and you have that, and people might be, maybe it's time to like backflip and do something different. No, I'm doing this. And it's that drive that you see in people who are really quite successful. They know what they're doing. It's their one thing. I don't know, have you ever read Phil Knight's book, The Shoe Dog, the Nike guy? So the guy who owns Nike, he's got a book. It's not Phil Knight. It's over there on the bookshelf actually. The one thing, and it talks about Phil Knight, the Nike guy, and they did one thing well. They did shoes well, and it's like KFC. KFC did the 11 herbs and spices, the one thing they did really well, and it's these Apple as well, and it's this. That one thing that you really want to do really well, and you just keep going for it, regardless of what happens. And I can see that's like in your business. You're like, you knew these things were good, and you're stuck with it. And it's just like, this is where you are now. And it's really quite inspiring to listen to. Is like, yeah, your story and how it's come through, and you've grown, and you've had these people come and help you, and just at the perfect time. And it just starts to. Belief systems are the biggest thing I think, like out of that story that I've taken out of that anyway. Like it's so good. Like just listening to your story and how it's all mapped out and it's just playing out. It's so good. What I want to draw into now is some 3 things that you could possibly offer the listener to some pieces of advice. What you've learnt along the way that you could offer someone who's potentially in the same position you were, on the dole, or just really struggling to make ends meet and really knows what they've got going on for them or whatever, and they just need to know these 3 different little pieces of nuggets of gold that you could potentially distribute.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, one thing I was going to add to that, like, I mean, I was very fortunate, because now you're saying, like, speak to people on the dole, so this isn't totally relevant, but for those who aren't, because I've actually got some friends who are, I've got one guy who makes mead, and I mean, I don't know if you know what mead is, it's like honey wine, so it's like what the Vikings drink, and he's in a job which he doesn't really want to be in, like, I think he's, like, doing caring and stuff like that, real tough gig, and he's a really gentle, humble guy. But his mead is phenomenal, and I've actually I met him at St Andrew's Market too. So he was a customer, but he'd always rock up and go, "Oh, you got to try my mead. It's really good," right, and all that sort of thing. And I can see that for people who are stuck here but they want to be here, they just need to believe and have faith. Now, for me, I was very lucky in one sense, unlucky in another sense, but I was lucky in the sense that I didn't really have a choice. And like I said to you before, I just wanted to be left alone, but the universe had other ideas. And I knew that I had, maybe I didn't consciously know, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that sooner or later it was going to catch up with me. Because I mean, I could go on for an hour with the amount of stories of like how I managed to jump ship with Centrelink and just, et cetera, and just get them to leave me alone, because for a long period of time, I needed to be on a path of reconstruction. In my 20s, I abused substances, and I really wasn't a together person. And I struggled with, I guess, the way my brain's wired. I suppose if you want to call it attention deficit disorder or whatever. So I didn't have an easy time at school, despite the fact that I believe myself to be a reasonably intelligent person, but I got really crappy marks and all that sort of thing. And so I struggled really to be in society. And so that period of time, even though it was an extended period of time, was very much to be able to cultivate my life. I did a lot of things like raw food and yoga and hitchhiking and woofing and all sorts of things. And I did that on the back of, Centrelink and I even got like doctor's certificates and rah. So I didn't have a choice, but it didn't just fall into my lap. One key thing that actually happened, I think it was just before I did the NEIS program, is I've been carrying around this book called The Greatest Salesman in the World, right, by Mandino. Now, Mandino's story is interesting in the fact that he nearly killed himself, but I think instead of walking into a gun shop, he walked into a library. That's the story. How true that is, I don't know. But I think that if you are in a place like my friend, or where you're here but you need to get here, you need faith. But that faith needs to be backed up by some kind of action. And I'm a big believer in saturating yourself with things that are going to move you in that direction. But I also think you can overly saturate. Like one thing I found is that, you know, I continually do things like Personal Power or Get the Edge by Tony Robbins, and I just, something in me would just kind of jolt and break. But when I read The Greatest Salesman in the World, especially from a business perspective, it kind of gives you the nuts and bolts as well as this habitual daily practice, because you're meant to read it 3 times a day. Once in the morning, once after lunchtime, and once before bed out loud. And there's like 10 months of this.
Yeah, right.
And it was interesting how certain things synced up. It's funny because there must be a number of people who've either got this mentality or they've read this book, because never giving up, right? Or like as that particular scroll says, like, you know, persisting until you succeed is key.
Mm-hmm.
Because just because, you know, it seems easy at one point doesn't mean it's going to be easy at another point. And just because it seems hard at one point doesn't mean it's not going to get easier. And if you give up round the corner from your success, you know, you're really going to regret it. It's going to not be great. And one thing they say, and I think they even said this in NEIS, is that the only difference between those who succeed and those who fail are the ones who give up. If you keep going, you're doing what the vast majority of people won't do.
Exactly.
They'll just, you know,
find the next easiest option and
take
that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, I've been listening to all that sort of stuff for ages. You know, I remember when I was doing pizza delivery driving at uni, because I mean that kind of counts as being on the dial. I did do uni, so it was like, you know, kind of. But I mean, I was like listening to recorded versions of The Secret.
Yeah.
You know, the original version, which had Esther Hickson and all that sort of thing in it, and just like constantly trying to saturate my mind. And for some people, it will take years, right? Like I think everyone's looking for this instant coffee spiritual resolution. And if you've got programs that say, I can't do it, you really need to be tenacious in terms of like breaking through that. And more than anything else, it's not just about like reading, because one thing, I'm not going to name names, but like I know I have one particular person in my life who would do all of the practices. I'm going to meditate, I'm going to read this book, and you know this book's going to tell me all these things, you know, that I need to do and put me into state. But then the rest of the day, right, they were just complaining and like in their old state of mind. And if you're just doing like 5% to like, you know, 95% of junk, you're just not going to win the game.
It's that embodiment. You embody what you're learning and embody what you're teaching and taking in. And so, yeah, it's like the people. It's even that old adage of when people go do their Tony Robbins 3-day seminar, then they walk out and they're preaching it from the ceiling for the next 2 days, and then the next minute they're back to what they've been doing previously. And it's like, well, I've been to my Tony Robbins like seminar, but you're not actually living into what he's actually taught you. Like if you actually lived into it, you might be a little bit further down the track than what. Yeah, so I think embodiment into what how you're saying is like that embodiment into everything that you're doing. It's like you're absorbing everything, but then you're actually putting it into practice. It's like yoga in everyday practice, everyday life. You're doing you may not be doing the asanas or whatever, or all the shapes, but you are practicing all these different pieces of the puzzle everywhere in life. I think you definitely have to embody what you're doing, otherwise you're just talking a load of shit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also be gentle with yourself, because if you've got a whole bunch of subconscious crap going on that's telling you can't do it, there's only a certain amount of time you can do something that's positive before the flip will happen anyway. And so you've got to be really gentle with yourself. Yeah. You know? And so I've never been of the, because my brother, for example, I remember when he was a kid, he would run 3Ks or whatever it was, and he would vomit. And he'd be like, yeah, man, I feel amazing. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And so I was always the Rolling Stone mentality, which is that you just keep rolling, and building momentum over time. And you'll find, and this is actually one of the things that's in The Greatest Salesman, and I've heard Will Smith say this too. In fact, Will Smith's dad made him and his brother build an entire wall after demolishing it over a course of, a summer. And so it may very well come from this, which is like, I will build my pyramid one brick at a time, because I know that many small tasks repeated will complete any undertaking. And so one thing that I did do, especially in the early days of Serendipity, it doesn't really matter now. It's different. When you've got a team, they are your bricks. Yeah. That doesn't mean you drop the ball, but it's so different. But when you're doing it on your own, which I had to for a period of time of incubation, it was like, well, dude, whatever you're doing, that's your business. Mm-hmm. So if I had a really crappy day, it didn't matter. I'd at least make one phone call, or I'd at least go down to Officeworks and do this, or whatever it was, I would do at least one brick. But on a good day, you're not going to put one brick down.
You put 2 or 3 down. Yeah.
2 or 3 down, or 4 or 5, or 6 or 10, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And you build momentum. And then I think you get to that precipice point, and this is where people really need to have faith, is that the universe will always catch you. Even though it doesn't feel like it, when you're ready to leap, there'll be people and situations and things that I am so blessed to have the team I have. They are amazing. Yep. I couldn't ask for anything better on every level. They are just phenomenal. And I mean, they've obviously come to their own, karmic place that links up with what's now Teelixir, but I know that like the work I put in the beginning, and I mean there were times I'd go to market and like my tent would blow away and be destroyed, or I'd walk home with less money than I spent, but I just keep walking, just keep going, and just keep reading that book, and just keep adding a brick a day. And some days are going to be better than others. I mean, a lot of the market stuff was like a fail. I really only enjoyed St Andrews, to be honest. I think I did 3 other markets. So yeah, and the tent blew away a few times. The other thing as well, actually, and this may just be my thing, but I really like to spend money where sometimes it appears to be a bit silly. I believe in touchstones. So I remember like I had like a tent that was worth about $250, and I could have just had that, but it started to become more like a temple. Because I spent a lot of time on Vistaprint making these posters, some of which, I had so many I couldn't actually populate my tent with it. And they really did mostly end up being the mushroom things. And by building those things, those little affirmations for yourself, that little kind of altar, it changes things. And then you get into state as well, where you're doing your little rituals. And, you can do that every day for your own personal practice, but you can do that for your business as well. So, I'd smudge the tent and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I ended up buying this really expensive tent, which I actually ended up selling to, I don't know if you've been to St Andrews, but the guy who makes smoothies, Kai, who still actually sells my stuff, that's my tent, right? But that tent was idiotically expensive. Yeah. And I think I got it slightly cheaper because the colour was slightly wrong or whatever. But, doing little things like that seemingly are, and you've got to do it within rationality. But I remember going, I want that. Because I knew that when I set it up, I was setting up a marketplace. It wasn't just a scrappy little tent. I had no intention of being at St Andrews for 13 years like some of those people are. I mean, it's cold, man. Yeah. Like it's a tough gig. Doing markets is a tough gig. And so by creating those little touchstones that seemingly don't necessarily mean anything in terms of the logical aspect of it, they can mean so much. And that's only obviously if that jives with people. But for me, that's been a big thing.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense. It's like, then you take pride in it.
Yeah.
It's like a builder having a toolbox full of shit tools, or a toolbox full of like well-kept chisels, a hammer that works. That was your place of work. And you need to you take pride in it. And you're like, cool, like these are really good tools. This is my really nice looking stall. Then you're more open to expressing how good your product is, because then you go, cool, like I've got pride in everything that I've got, and every little touch point. Yeah, and it makes sense. It's like when you take pride in all that sort of stuff, then everything else starts to flow on from it. And if then when you have an employer or employee, they see your surroundings, they go, oh cool, he takes really good pride in this, like I want to take pride in it as well, and people start to buy into it. And I feel that's because I've worked at a few different workplaces, and some they don't really, places a mess, and it's a reflection on how that business is going.
Oh, 100%, man. Feng Shui, everything. For sure.
And I think from there, we'll finish on the 3 questions I ask every guest. With the journey and stuff that you've been on in mind, just 3 things that you could offer your younger self that could potentially obviously help other people out there.
3 things?
Yeah, 3 things that... Something like, for me, in my journey, it was like telling myself not to overthink so many things. Because I've been a classic overthinker all my life. But once I've started getting out of that overthinking situation, it's just like, just don't overthink it. It'll happen as it happens. So 3 things that you would probably tell your younger self that would maybe shape, or you may end up in the same position.
Yeah, I think the first one would be never give up. I definitely think that my younger self could have really... It's taken me a long time to realise never give up. I would also say probably to be more enthusiastic about the things that I really wanted to pursue and not worry about, the fallout. Like I was actually saying this the other day, because I actually ended up doing a drama degree for 3 years, but I remember I was in year 3 and I didn't do some role, so I told myself, oh, that's it, I can't, I can't do it next year because I didn't do it the year before. And I think these things can obviously apply in many areas, but I really regret that. Hugely regret that. And I think that I've done that in a lot of things where I've just gone, I'm not enough, right? Because I didn't do it this time. There's always another opportunity. You can always, and I think that actually leads to another, broader realization, which is that, have you ever heard of the book The Artist's Way?
I've heard of it.
So it's funny. It's like, so many people tell themselves, oh, I'm too old, or, oh, I'm too busy, or, I'm too unfit, I'm too this, I'm too that. And the reality is that my grandmother, who passed away a few years ago, I only met her twice in my life. She, I think, is like the oldest degree holder in all of Australia.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, how old do you need to be to go and get a degree? Well, it doesn't really matter. If you want to go get a degree, go get a degree. Yeah. So whatever you want to do, go for it. You're never too old. It's never too late. Just go for it and never give up. And a third thing. I mean, it's like that classic thing, and I still don't apply it really. But I think the things that we regret are the things that we don't do, not the things that we do. As much as that's cheesy, I think it's true. Yeah. And I think I'm actually saying that to my now self. Yeah.
No, but it's like one of those things, when you start to think about it, you go, maybe, I can actually listen to what I'm saying right now and actually implement that stuff. Like when Emma asked me the questions, and I'm sitting there, it's like, and I started just spilling it, and I'm like, this is what I should probably be also listening to right now, because it's still this thing that's still playing out. And it's something special when you actually then start to verbalize it. You go, let's work with that. That's cool. Where can everybody find you? I'd love to actually probably get you. We're running out of time. But
well, I was going to say, I brought you some immune defense, man.
Yeah. So
this is, I mean, and actually, like, I don't know if I should show the camera, but this was the very first label that Dan designed. There's a whole story that we probably don't have time for, but it's like a Vesica Pisces, and I really like that. At the same time he was designing it, I was literally looking at spore prints in Paul Stamets' book on microremediation. But one of the things that we can really work with so much more to, like, as I said before, like gain better controls of our stress anyway, but immune system is such a key thing. And people have so much more compromised immune systems these days for so many more reasons. Again, we don't have time to go into them, but So I've been like really getting into this personally and having that a lot more. But anyway, I just brought that to you. So
cool, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But where can we reach? At Teelixir.com. Teelixir.com.
Yeah, Teelixir.com.
Yeah. We're in shops.
Yep.
All around the country. We're
This
on
is the
Amazon.
this is the packaging that you can look for in the shops.
Yeah, we're on Amazon Australia, and we are on Amazon America
Awesome.
as well.
That's epic.
And where else? And that's it. And online.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'd
No
love
worries,
to have you
man.
back on another time and maybe dive a little bit deeper into either mushrooms or
Dude,
more
absolutely.
of your journey.
Yeah.
I think it's a very fascinating chat, and I'd love to do that again.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, man.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for having me, man. That's great.
Thanks for
Yeah.
that. It was epic.